Welcome everyone to We Are Endurance webinar series. I'm Hillary Topper, and today I am going to introduce you to Jill. Jill focuses on mental health issues, and she's also a writer. So she does private counseling, and she also writes for Triathlon Magazine and some other endurance athlete magazines. And without further ado, Jill, I'm going to hand it right over to you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. So just to give you a little bit of my background, I first was a triathlete, and then I became an ultra runner. And that was, just a million years ago, I guess now. And sort of along the way of being an athlete in those disciplines, I just kind of started to notice a few things that made me question sort of a little bit about our sport and what we do. And so kind of led me on a journey to be more interested about some aspects of mental health as it relates to endurance sport, ultra endurance sport, and all the rest. And so I actually went back to school and got a master's degree. And now I am a researcher at the University of Bern in Switzerland. And I'm actually coming to you from Italy tonight, your afternoon, my evening. And so the work that I do now is focused on supporting athletes in the not so great stages of things like overtraining syndrome or relative energy deficiency in sport, or et cetera, overreaching, kind of all aspects that we hope we don't get into. That's really the goal, to have you avoid doing all of that. And so I do mentoring calls for athletes. I write for Triathlon Magazine. And of course, there's the academic writing that I do and the research at the university. So what I would love to talk to you about, and I know that the group here has sort of varying experience levels in triathlon. Is that right? Like varying from, is there anyone who's very new to triathlon?
There's mostly, we've got a split group between triathlons and runners.
Okay.
So we have a lot of runners in this group.
Great.
They don't do triathlons.
Okay. That's good to know. I kind of, to be honest with you, I feel like a greater affinity towards the runner group. That's just, I always have. And I've, kind of been up and down and all around through the distances in running. So hopefully I'll have a lot to say that makes sense. So what I want to talk to you about is something that you never hear. I think that in endurance sport, we hear a lot about no limits and no barriers and all these different things, and it's all in your mind and all this stuff. But I would like to offer you a different alternative to that thought. And the philosophy that I like to share with people is something slightly different. So I'm going to put this in present mode, and then I'm going to share my screen. I made this little, I made this little slide presentation mostly so that I remember what I would like to talk to you about. So here we go. All right. So everyone can see my screen, I'm sure. Move this over and put this into present mode so you can see it better. Okay. So kind of a funny concept, right? How to be a triathlete forever or a runner forever. This is not something we hear a lot about. We hear sometimes about things like, how to be faster, how to be stronger, how to go harder, how to have a run streak. But we don't really hear a lot about what it takes for actual longevity. And you may be surprised by the fact that what it takes to be in your sport that you love for long term actually may require you to think differently about how you approach it, particularly with regard to your training, recovery, nutrition. So we're going to talk about all those things. Let's see. Okay. So this is the philosophy that I like to teach. Instead of no limits, I want you to see your limits. I want you to know where they are so that you can avoid smashing into them. That's the big thing right there. If you operate in a system that doesn't acknowledge your limits, you are more likely to step over the line where you shouldn't. And then because we really love what we do, we're apt to keep stepping over that line because we love it so much. We don't want to stop. So when we talk about our limiters in terms of longevity, and I really simplified this just to give you not everyone's going to remember every piece of this. So the biggest limiters, what are they? The first one that we have to talk about is the endocrine system. And this is something that it's very difficult to hear people talking about this, particularly when, again, we're in these communities where we love what we do so much. The endocrine system is this beautiful symphony of glands and hormones that control literally every single thing in your body. And again, like I said, we're not going to get too scientific with this. But what is really important that we understand is that the endocrine system has a lot of fail-safes set into it, built into it, so that as we start to stress the system, the endocrine system will compensate up to a certain point. But with chronic stress to the system, without adequate recovery, you're going to find that the endocrine system starts to get tired and then eventually doesn't want to work anymore. And unfortunately, what happens is stress hormone is necessary, right? That's how we actually get a training effect. If we are able to generate some stress hormone after we have a training session, we are able to go through a period of adaptation because we've had recovery, and so on and so forth until we become stronger athletes, right? But if we don't rest and we don't recover in between those training sessions, the endocrine system becomes overtaxed. And the more stress hormone we create, the more we actually rob the ability of the body to do all those other wonderful things that it needs to do with all the other hormones. And so the creation of stress hormone will steal from all those other beautiful hormones that have to do things like keep your metabolism up and keep you fertile and manage temperature control and also help you sleep, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's vitally important that we recognize the stresses in our lives. So know where your stress comes from. It might not make you happy to know that the brain does not perceive any difference between physical and mental stress. Got a little amygdala in your brain that's responsible to tell you when there's danger, and it is very primitive, not really that nuanced. It only knows danger. It doesn't really categorize that danger in terms of traffic jam, I'm going through a divorce, I have an exam, I just did a 10-mile run, et cetera, et cetera. It just sees it all as the same. So it's vitally important that we remember that stress is additive. So up to a certain point, and I'm sure you're aware of all the literature that will tell you that exercise is a stress reliever, and that is actually true, up to a certain point. And then after a certain point, that stress relief will actually turn into additive stress. And so where you've been redlining it in your training and you haven't slept really well this week, and maybe you skipped lunch, and maybe, and you had a couple of too many glasses of wine on a Saturday night, and you find yourself the next week sluggish on your training, not feeling very good. Maybe you feel like your body's a little bit swollen, you can't go to the bathroom, et cetera, et cetera. And all these things start piling up, and you realize what's suffering there is your endocrine system's telling you you need some rest. So this is very important. And we can, if you have questions about this, we can make sure we can dive into all the little nuances of that, but that's one of them. Second biggest limiter is the sympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is what is recruited when you have that stress. It is what jumps in to save the day, so to speak. And it's activated to help you recover. And if you're anyone here measuring their HRV? Anyone have one of those like Whoop straps or a ring or anything like that? Yeah. You can also check it on your iWatch. If you're checking your HRV on a daily basis to see sort of your relative load, let's say, of stress, what you're actually looking at there is the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And like we said, this is normal. We want this to happen, right? We want the sympathetic nervous system to jump in and give us training adaptation from all of our hard work. But we also want to be able to understand that the more that sympathetic nervous system is activated, the more it taxes the system. And again, that chronic stress is going to, without the adequate recovery, is what is going to cause a problem. So, oops, let me go there here again. Okay, so now this is kind of a funny little slide here. And this is my sort of like, for anyone who's visual, way to describe to you where a lot of the problems may come in. So when you are training, if your training looks like this guy right here. So if you are just in this mindset where you believe that the more you do, the more benefits you're going to get, and you just have this idea that there's kind of really no limit to the amount of training, to amount of benefit you'll get from training, right? Because we know that some is good, so more must be better, right? And so if your training diary and your sort of mindset looks and your expectations kind of looks like this ever onward infinite climb, this means you need a mindset shift, right? Because there's no such thing as an ever onward infinite climb. There's no such thing as unmitigated good when it comes to participation, even in something we love, like running or triathlon. And then we can look over here at this guy right here. And so hopefully what you're seeing here is really hard efforts and then crash and then try again and then a crash and then, and on and on and on until you kind of like really go as hard as you can and crash again. So I said, kind of joking, this means you need a coach. And what this actually means is that you're overdoing your effort and kind of suffering the consequences. Instead of a nice, even periodization of training, you've got a lot of peaks and valleys. And it probably means you want to check in and see if you are appropriately planning your training for, the training block you're in, the year, so on and so forth. And this one's sneaky. This one means you're afraid. So this is a classic plateau we have here. We rise up to a certain level of fitness and then we just want to hang there, right? And it's like, well, that doesn't seem so bad. Like, why is that going to be problematic? The reason why that is problematic is because this plateau here, no matter where it is, if it's very high or it's very low, it's unrealistic. Nothing is ever going to stay the same. You and I and everyone we know, we're different like every 7 seconds. So we generate a whole new pack of cells and we are going to change and our training should change along with us. To be clear, and we're going to start talking about this in the next slide, there is a particular profile of person that tends to fall into this. And this is the person who has gotten into a sport for a particular reason. And that could be physical and it can be mental. And then they begin to have this relationship with the sport that goes beyond fitness and it becomes something like therapy or weight control or something to do when you are bored or going through something difficult in life. And if you're unwilling to back away from this level that you've established and let's say detrain for a little while so that you can train up again, so that you can take care of your body and your mind, it means that you are using the sport to do something other than train. It means that you are now asking this thing that you love to do a lot of work. And that's where danger comes in. And I keep hearing that button. Here we go. Okay. So body image. And this is where we get into body image will ruin your relationship with triathlon or running, by the way. And I put this out here kind of as a joke. I actually just wrote an article in Triathlon Magazine that sort of had to do with this. It's my editor is Susan Lakey. If you read Triathlon Magazine, she's wonderful. And she said to me, we have to do something about diets in the new year. And, she knows how I'm very anti-diet. And what I did was I wrote an article about how, sometimes when people are looking to lose weight or change their body composition through training, it really means that there could be some kind of insecurity there that's underlying a lot of what they're doing. And it's worthwhile looking into those things because remember, it's like, I'm the mental health girl, right? So anything that you're going to do that you're going to force you to perhaps train when you shouldn't, or make training decisions that aren't based on fitness and aren't based on your race success, those tend to be problematic. So to that end, this is a study that I love talking about. It's this study, the body size dissatisfaction among male and female triathletes. And I wrote the abstract is there and I put this, this disclaimer over it because it's really the data point that is the most important in my opinion, which is that 100% of the athletes in this study reported feeling dissatisfied with their BMI. So now you know why I mentioned it, right? Because I am in scientific literature all day, every day of my life. And I never see 100% of anything. Like I have never seen 100% result on literally anything that I've ever studied or written a paper on. So when I see it, I really like to know why it's there. And I think that this is a really important point. It's something that we need to be aware of because these sports that we do tend to generate sometimes feelings of insecurity or discontent or frustration, particularly now with social media. For those of you who are on, things like Instagram or heaven forbid, TikTok, I'm sorry. But any of these places where we're really getting this sort of visual representation of athletes in their different forms and functions, and we begin to get this kind of dissatisfaction when we look at ourselves because we don't look like the people that we see in social media, right? And maybe even sometimes when we participate in races and we don't look like the people that are around us in the races. And so you can see that this can be an issue in our community. So we talk about mental health, right? And again, this is stuff that I know could be controversial depending on where you come from or what your experience is. Sport is not therapy, right? It's not. It is a happy adjunct to therapy. It can be helpful if you are aware of, your need for psychological support, psychiatric support. But sport is not therapy. And if we're asking sport to be therapy, we are really asking it again to do a lot of work. We're putting a lot of pressure on that one point, and eventually we may break it. So it's going to help you feel good, but it's not going to fix all your problems. And then second super important point with mental health is that sport, your sport, whatever it is, if you're a runner, if you're a triathlete, it's not your identity. If you are basing everything you know and like and love about yourself on the sport that you're doing, you're setting yourself up for potential difficulties as life changes, injuries may arise, illness, for whatever circumstance comes up that you're unable to participate, you really leave yourself vulnerable to putting literally all of your eggs in this one basket with regard to who and what you are, what you're proud of, where your value is. It's important for you to establish a feeling that you will be you with and without the sport, that it's a beautiful facet of your personality, and it's going to bring you so much joy. You're going to experience things that you wouldn't have the opportunity to experience otherwise. All of those things are going to add to the experience of you. It's going to make you a well-rounded person. But if we're thinking that once we step away from the sport for whatever reason, that we are not an athlete, that's problematic. We get this kind of phenomenon sometimes as athletes where we feel great on a day we're training. We don't like to take rest days because we feel like less of an athlete. I'm not a runner on a rest day, right? That kind of mindset. And those over time, I hear laughter, those mindsets will become problematic. Absolutely. And so it's really important to call those out. It's important to establish a good kind of home base in here before you are going to allow yourself to be vulnerable to the sort of ins and outs of training and your physical well-being, right? And then let's see. So this is kind of my final slide here. What is important for us to do? So I'll be honest. I first got into ultramarathon because in the late 90s, when I was in graduate school the first time, I was like surfing the very, very baby internet that it was, and saw this picture of Scott Jurek. If you know who Scott Jurek is, right? He's the famous ultra runner from, days of yore. He's still out there. But if you remember at the time, he had the long curly hair, right? I talk about this all the time. It was very compelling. You saw this guy running through the trees. It looked fabulous. What is he doing? What is he eating? How far is he going? What is this magical thing he's doing, right? If anyone read, Ultramarathon Man by Dean Karnazes, right? Talking about running down the road with the pizza in his hand, running all night to Half Moon Bay, which unfortunately is in the news recently for, not because of ultra running, right? But you get this beautiful romantic idea of what it's going to be and what it makes you want. It kind of makes you fall in love with it. It becomes this beautiful, narrative about what you want to be and what you want to do. And it is poetic, right? And yes, I love that. And let that be your motivation. Awesome. But we need to couple that with physiological reality. We need to be aware of the fact that, probably not a good idea to run 30 miles through the night in your silk underwear because, probably not the best thing, Dean Karnazes, especially if you don't have any type of background. Can you train up? Like, let's say if you've never, ever, you just are like newbie into triathlon and you're like, I want to do an Ironman. Can you train up for an Ironman in a year and a half? Well, it won't be pretty, but you could probably do it, right? So we want to think about these things like, how much do you love it? How long are you willing to be patient, right? To get to your goal, because the longer you're willing, if your patience is longer, your career as an athlete will be too. So don't make triathlon or running, don't make it carry your baggage. That is not the place for it. Your baggage has a place. It's not in your sport. hey, listen, we all take it with us sometime on the bike, right? Or on the run. I used to say, I can't tell you how many breakups and crises in my life got beat out on the road under my running shoes, right? So many. And that is going to be a facet of our life for sure. But it's important, again, to sort of contextualize that and say, do we want this to be where we put the fulcrum of all of the pressure points of us managing our life? And then the final note is stay in your lane. And I put this here because we are all susceptible to comparison to people around us, and we are all susceptible to images we see in the media. We're susceptible to those romantic ideals and that magical thinking, and we are susceptible. And that is what makes us really great at what we do. So, for example, if you read Hillary's book, or if you know Hillary, you know that she came from a place of feeling a certain way about herself, but believed some magic that she could do something, right? And she did it. And that is, we want that, right? We want to cultivate that. We want to say, yes. But if Hillary was out there saying, well, I'm doing this because I want to look like that, or I want to perform like that, or I want to be like that, that's a different discussion. And so therefore, have your goals and make sure that they're big and wonderful and that they're going to take you into the next, year, month, decade, whatever it is, but also recognize where those come from and why you have them. That's really important because the motivation has to be realistic. So that's my blah, blah about sort of where I come from and the stuff that I talk about. And I am happy to answer questions or.
We have one in the chat.
Yep. Okay.
And she this is I May, and she says, I hear people saying running is my therapy and it's a lot cheaper. Therapy is therapy. Running can't be supportive, but I've never viewed it as therapy. How do you respond when you hear this statement?
Yeah, well, it's sort of, and I want to say this kind of with the context that I work in forensic psychiatry. Okay. So for me, mental health is something that is not self-service. Okay. It is self-support, but it's not self-service. And when we need mental health support, what we really need is to have professional guidance about what is necessary. And then our work is to take what we learn and to put it into practice in our everyday lives. And so just as you wouldn't try to teach yourself accounting if you weren't an accountant, right? Just like you wouldn't teach yourself, any kind of language, right? You could try you can use your Duolingo, but nothing is like, actually interacting with another person who might be a teacher that can teach you what to do, right? It's the same thing here, which is when you interact with a qualified mental health care practitioner. And by the way, that can take on many forms and functions. Like, I'm not the person to sit here and say, you must see a therapist. Some people may really enjoy learning to meditate and like actually having a meditation teacher, working through meditation, meditating in a group, going to retreats and things like this. Other people may find that their religion is something that supports their mental health and they find community there. But if you are looking for this sport that you're doing singularly in your head in an echo chamber, right, to be the therapeutic, do the therapeutic heavy lifting, you are asking it to do too much. One more, I would say, example of that is it is ill-advised for people to use a spouse as a therapist, right? Like, we can't, or, significant other partner, we can't like unload everything on them, right? That's going to ruin our relationship. It's not where you place all of that pressure. And it's the same thing here. If I love running so much, I'm going to ruin my relationship with it by making it be the thing that carries all of my burden, right? I love it too much. I respect it too much, right? And so it's important to separate those things, just like we would in any other important relationship in our lives.
One of the questions I had for you, we talked a little bit about this offline, is I know a couple of people who have signed up for big races, and just as they got closer to that race, they decided they're going to drop out because they were just too nervous, too stressed out, whatever. let's hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's really important in that space to ask, to really dive into what that person's reasons are. I think in our community, we have the gut reaction of being like, push through, just do it, don't be afraid. You know, it could be that that person has a compelling reason why the goal does no longer suits them. And that is really important. And the reason why it's important is to, if we can uncover the reason why the goal no longer supports them, we can potentially allow that person to engage with the sport without feeling like I'm a failure because I didn't do this one thing, and be like, this one thing wasn't for me, maybe something else is. So diving into that reason and understanding like what that person's motivation is. I mean, there's certain times where people have jitters. Okay. Like we have jitters. Like, I mean, Lord help me if there's no, like, I hate to say this, but like, Lord help me if there's no sandy can nearby at a race start. Like, no, I have jitters forever and always, amen. And I've done 1,000 races. I always get jitters, right? Then that is acceptable and it's normal. And it's part of like, that's what makes it exciting, right? That's what makes you feel alive about it. But if a person is having legitimate, like, I cannot do this, I don't want to do this, and their fear is coming from something that has its origin in a non-sport related thing, you know, that's an area where we might be able to you know, save that person from sort of feeling spurned away from the sport forever, and like, let them understand, like, if you do not do this one event, you are still an athlete. Like, you can still train, you can still maybe find another event that suits you, but certainly don't feel discouraged. Let's find something else. Let's work with something else.
David had a question.
Day to do this. This is like, well, awesome.
Oh,
I don't know if you can hear me well because I got you in the earpiece.
Yeah, I can hear you.
And of course, I'm doing construction at the same time.
I'm loving watching you, by the way. This is great.
So this is the thing, right? I was telling Hillary, like, I really want to work on my visualization. So visualizing the race, visualizing the win, visualizing the breakthrough, because I believe that my mind is such a battle. You know, I've been on runs, right? So I'll go for a 10-mile run when I never did it. Well, I have done a 10-mile run. So I'm going on this 10-mile run, and at mile 2 and 3, I already got the jitters. Like, I'm not going to be able to do this. And I'll say out loud, like, you know, excuse my language, stop being a bitch. Like, you've been here before. Like, what's up? Like, you know, get it together. You know, just worry about your next step. And, you know, I've read Iron Cowboy, and it was always about like, you know, working on callousing your mind, working on like, you know, really visualizing and pushing through, because a lot of the fear is always in my mind and never materializes.
Right.
So what can you tell me to help me, you know, get over that? I'm going to mute out for noise.
Yeah. I'll offer you an alternative solution. So if you have this kind of pattern, which you've described as a pattern of kind of approaching what is a reach of a goal, right? And then doubting yourself right before you get there, and then having to talk yourself through that. What I would invite you to do is look back in your life and find other places where you have been afraid of getting over the finish line. Most of our fears are mirrored in our relationship to sport. So if you are a person who's, let's say, a very insecure person in their life, right, is apt to overtrain because they can't accept the fact that, you know, if you're going to run a 26-mile marathon, that you're only supposed to run 20 miles, right? There might be like, well, what am I going to do for that last 6? And that insecurity gets them to be like, well, I'll run 22, and then they're trashed for race day, right? So same here. I would invite you, instead of thinking about battling the run, reflect back on other places in your life where you see that same pattern playing out. And 2 things, don't just be like, well, I, you know, this is how I beat it and moved on. Ask yourself why that comes up for you. What were you maybe told? What did you see other people do? What influenced you to feel that way at those critical moments in your life? Reflect on how you overcame them. Reflect on where they came from, though, because everything we do has an origin that's way deeper than we think. So instead of thinking so much about, let me just kind of like switch my mind and drown it out to move forward, I would say, go back, dive in, check in, because that's where your strength comes from. You have established a pattern of success with that same type of behavior, just not in running, in something else. And so check in with yourself, find out where those pieces are, and then use that as your strength moving forward. It's not a platitude at that point. It's not just an empty, like, push, push, push. At that point, it's a deep reflection on, like, yeah, I've done this. I can do it again.
It's great. Nicole.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
You're welcome. You're welcome.
okay. I've been doing triathlon for, I think it's 16 years now. And when I started, about the only thing I knew how to do was bike. It was always my happy place, you know, get me out of the water, get me on the bike, and then suffer through the run. Few years later, I got a coach. My swim improved, my run really improved, but the bike was always where I was happiest. About a year and a half ago, I had an accident on the bike, dislocated my elbow, experienced the worst pain of my life. And since that time, I've healed, I've regained my use of my elbow, everything's fine that way. But whenever I'm on the bike in a situation where I feel like I might lose control, so I get hit by a side gust in the wind, or I come to a steeper downhill, especially if I can't see where it ends up, I start to panic. I put on the brakes, I sit up, and I just start to panic. I'm having trouble getting through this. Did a little bit of work with a sports psychologist, just online, so and so, for how it's working, and I'm still don't know how to get past this.
Yeah. There's I have two very close friends. One who went through the same thing that you're describing 3 years ago. She actually ended up with a traumatic brain injury, et cetera, et cetera. She's just now, 3 years later, getting back on her bike. And another good friend of mine, Adelaide Kennett, she wrote the book called Degloved, same thing, triathlete, on her bike. And she went through a very serious car accident, went through the windshield of a car, and she wrote a whole book about her experience and how it was a very long-term process for her to feel comfortable again on the bike. And so a couple things here. So first of all, cognitively, as I'm sure you've probably noticed, one thing that happens is that there's this little bit of dissonance when you're on the bike because you have muscle memory, right? And your body feels like it knows what to do. And so where there's maybe a bump in the road, you know how to take the bump, you know how to do this, you know how to do that, you know how to, your body kind of takes over for you where your fear is there. And so take comfort in that, because that muscle memory doesn't go anywhere. And so it's implicit in you. But I would say that the process of coming back from something that is, let's call it a psychological injury, which, much to everyone's chagrin, is way harder to come back from than, let's say, a muscle strain, a tear, even a break. It takes longer. And it is, that progress is never going to be linear. It's always going to be a little up, little down, little up, little down. And so I would say that instead of thinking about where you should be with regard to your fear, I would say respect the fear and make friends with it, and recognize, recognize that the fear is going to be your companion. I'm not going to BS you on this. The fear is going to be your companion for a while, and that your options are to let it, overtake and keep you off the bike, or for you to snuggle up to it, see it when it gets close to you and be like, I see you, but don't be daunted. Stay with it. Let it ride with you for a while, because it's going to be there. And don't fear the fear is really the thing there. The fear is a natural wound, just as if you had a muscle tear. And it's going to take longer than probably you would want to. But I truly think that the little tiny bite every day is way better than trying to sit at a banquet with this. And that if you can stay consistent and you can keep your rides a little short, you can, do whatever you can to make yourself comfortable. You're not being a wuss. Do whatever you can to make yourself comfortable. Rely on the muscle memory, know it's there, but make friends with that fear, because, not everyone will tell you the truth, but it will be there for a while.
It's funny, you talk about the muscle memory, but in a way, I've got mental memory. It's like, I know I've been through this exact downhill literally 100 times, but this, the next time I get to it, I seize up again.
Yeah.
And it's like,
yeah. And you might seize up, let's say, leading up to the hill. Then the next time you might seize up when you're at the top of the hill. And then maybe the next time it'll be when you're like coming down, and each time it will get better, but it's very, very minutely incremental, because what you're doing there, like I said, and not to repeat myself again, but that mental injury is way more significant and really damaging, in the sense that you can come back from it. Of course you can, but it is going to be your companion.
That's great.
Thank
That's
you.
great advice. And I think that's great advice also for people who fear the swim. There's a lot of people out there who just, they become like, they can't get in the water for some reason. I like the way you position that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's especially on the swim. I think, for example, I used to joke and say, I'm not really swimming, I'm drowning forward. Right? Because it's like, I'm not a natural swimmer. I was one of those people that, I was, fine on the run and fine on the bike, but I had to learn how to swim. And it's like, any beautiful thing that I was doing in the pool went to total, what, when I got in the water. And, you're just, there's people around you and you're getting kicked in the face, and your goggles are going off and you can't breathe. And you're looking at the kayak next to you going, do I hang on? Do I not hang on? It's this whole thing. And it's like setting our expectations of like some parts of sport, like they're just gonna suck. There's just no way around it. It's just gonna be that way. But instead of resisting that, kind of making friends with it and making a contingency for that. So like, I used to sing my way through a swim. That's ridiculous. But I would sing, hey, my name is Amy. I live in Alabama and we sell apples. That thing. I used to sing myself the alphabet through a swim. And that was my little trick, just to keep myself focused. But I'm like, there was no gracefulness in any of that. And I think that's okay. I think that we have to say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the, how does that go? It's like, don't let, just because you mess up one part of it, don't throw the whole thing out. You've got a reason to be there. Don't be discouraged by those little things, because that's like very normal and just a part of life. So.
Absolutely. Anybody else have any questions? I have a bunch more, but I don't want to take up the whole thing here. Okay, well, I want to talk a little bit about body image, because you started with that. Yeah, I think we all have issues with body image, and a lot of us go into endurance sports thinking that we're going to lose weight, or we're going to change our shape, or what have you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. This is a topic that I think is really fascinating. Because I think a lot of us do get into sport because we're looking for either body composition changes, weight changes. And so what I will say is this, is that if you have never done sport before and you come into running or triathlon with the goal of body composition changes, the effect of your training plus the effect of, let's say, any dietary changes that you've made, because people typically come in and they'll go, well, I'm going to clean up my diet. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And if you're making changes that are sustainable to you, for example, you might just decide, you just don't want to eat a certain type of thing anymore, or something easy. You'd be like, I always used to put cream in my coffee, right? You guys are in New York, right? So
Some of us.
Right. So exactly. So like, I lived in New York many years ago, you get in your habit of the place you stop for your coffee. Like, you take your coffee a certain way. It could be something like, what, I always get like double cream in my coffee. I think I'm just going to be like, what, I'm just going to go with skim, or I'm going to try something different. And that change could bring about some weight loss as you start to train for a sport. And those things are sort of maybe natural changes that you make and they're sustainable, and you go, you know, I don't really eat that cream anymore anyway. I kind of prefer the, you know, either black or whatever kind of way of changing it. And when you start to do those things, you will most likely see your body is recruiting muscle in a different way. Your metabolism is doing different things. You'll most likely see body composition changes, some weight loss, maybe, you know. But if you're making changes that are not sustainable, you'll know. And here's how you'll know. So non-sustainable changes. If the term cheat day is in your vocabulary, you are not living sustainably. That is not a sustainable diet. Right? You should not need a cheat day. If a cheat day is in your life, you're doing something wrong during the week. Okay. So that's number one. Number two, if you find yourself doing things like going to bed hungry, right? Listen, I was born in 1976. So we're talking height of like Weight Watchers, right? So like, remember, go to bed hungry. It means your body's burning fat, right? If we have those mindsets, like still hanging around, they are not going to serve us. So if you're an athlete and you're going to bed hungry, okay, no, you are not going to be set up for your training the next day. You're going to be overly tired, overly grumpy. You're probably not going to sleep well. And then you're going to set yourself up for sleep deprivation, which jacks up your hunger. And then everything goes to pot, right? So sustainable is what works. The other thing that, other way you'll know if your diet is not sustainable is if you drop a whole bunch of weight, right? And you love it. And then you're kind of edging up in your weight. Okay. That is sometimes a natural effect of restricting too much and then realizing I cannot hold this. So the initial weight loss, if it's significant, it may be exciting, but it's also a little bit concerning. So what we're looking for is sustainable changes that are things that we are comfortable with for the rest of our lives, that we're not doing things like cheat days, that we are not looking to make body composition changes by changing our diets, doing crazy things like intermittent fasting, keto diets, all this nonsense that is antithetical to health and antithetical to hormone balance for men and for women. These things are going to set us up for problems. They're not going to fuel our training. If you think about a steam engine, right? If you're a locomotive with a steam engine on it, right? And you want it to go faster, the last thing you do is stop putting fuel in it. So you have to think about it. Sometimes we have to make a decision. Do we want to perform like an athlete or do we want to look like an athlete? Those are two different things. And by the way, I am not saying that you should choose one or the other. It's up to you, but just realize that you're probably not going to have both at the same time. Up to a certain point, you'll likely see, many of you may have experienced up to a certain point changes, right? But you're going to get to a point where it's going to stop. And then to get past that quote unquote, you know, like stopping point in the diet, the plateau that everyone talks about, that plateau is in terms of your weight, that's kind of like, you're good. If you push past that, you do crazy dietary things to break through that, you might be setting yourself up for bigger trouble on the other end. Hopefully that kind of meandering way of answering that question.
No, that was great. Thank you. I have another question about people who go into triathlon and immediately sign up for a half Ironman or a full Ironman. They have no experience whatsoever in.
Oh, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that? Is that, I mean, because I think that what happens is maybe they do it and then they never go back. I mean,
Yes.
what's
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. And by the way, I'm reading, Steve, what you said, but I'm aware that my diet is both seasonal and relative to my level of training. Yes, absolutely. And that's the way it should be. Your way you eat should be relative to your training. And also sometimes it should also be relative to your birthday, and cake is good. So, you know, that's got to keep that stuff in there. So to answer the question about how to not kind of blow your brains out as you start ramping up to athletics or to sport participation, it's exciting. You know, I mean, we can watch like Ironman documentaries, YouTube, you can catch like, you know, all the footage from Kona, you know, you get really into it, you get excited. And I think, and there's a portion of the population for whom having to train for many hours is really compelling. Examples: people who may be going through a divorce, people who maybe lost a job, downshifted from a job, maybe suffering from a little empty nest syndrome, maybe just went through some kind of breakup, moved to a new town. That's what happened to me. I got a job in Florida of all places from New York City, and I moved down there, knew no one, and boy, had a lot of time to train for triathlon, right? So in those moments, sometimes people want to fill up their time by saying, you know, I'm going to put this project in place. I'm going to train for a half Ironman, and I've never done it before, but I can do it. I would say, again, kind of like what I started off this conversation with, is if you want to last long in this sport or any other, your ability to slow down your progression is going to really help you lengthen the amount of time that you can be in the sport healthfully. And with that goes periodization of training, right? And thinking of your goals, not so much in just terms of seasonal blocks, but also year-long blocks. If it were me and I was starting over again, I would take one whole year of doing like just sprints. I would take another whole year of just doing Olympic distance. I would really think before that third year, I would be thinking about maybe a half, and I would wait till that fourth year to do an Ironman or even beyond, because truly there is quite a difference between a half Ironman and an Ironman in terms of time required and also just physical output and capability. And honestly, that's how I would do it, because if you kind of, like we said, blow your brains out through the first few races, you do risk burning yourself out. It is possible, by the way, physical and mental, because remember I told you that stress is additive, right? You can burn yourself out mentally on training. You can burn yourself out physically on training. And before you know it, you don't want to do it anymore. And you're back where you started from. And you might think, gosh, I love it so much. I can't picture that happening, but it can happen. It truly can. So slow and steady, and think way long-term. Our culture doesn't like that, but it's really the most effective way to really approach ramping up to bigger races.
Terrific. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? All right. Well, then I'm going to say thank you. I think this was fantastic. This was one of the better webinars that we've had, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you. This is an important topic that we don't hear about that much. You know, we don't read about, well, we read about it when you write about it, but we don't read about it enough, you know, and we think we all become part of our own little bubble and think we're alone in this, but we're not. We're, you know, everybody's going through the same thing. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's true. There is no such thing as a certain, like, this is a runner, this is a triathlete. Like, you're all runners, we're all triathletes. We're all whatever, we are all included in this community. And there's many different expressions of athletic ability and athletic interest. It doesn't have to be Ironman. It doesn't have to be marathon. Just the fact that you are interested in participating and feel motivated is great. And I would just say, is like, it's very important to consider, you know, where you are consuming information in terms of, like, even if you're just learning about the sport, or if you're, you know, watching stuff online, if you're looking at social media, if you're, you know, reading books and stuff, just remember, like, try to step back and think about where that stuff is coming from and what maybe the motivation of that person is. You know, there's I just kind of actually talked about this on social media the other day. There's a couple of people out there that are writing books and have quite a bit of a media presence who are not healthy, and they are not sharing healthy ideas about what it is to participate in these sports. And not everything you see, just because it's like somebody who's got a great big book deal and they've been on the Rich Roll podcast, like, that is not necessarily, you know, the litmus test for health. So just be aware of what you're consuming, and just, you know, when in doubt, try to mix it up and step away from even just the whole sport media for a while. You know, go read something else, come back, think about your relationship to the sport, and don't be influenced by a lot of that stuff.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, everybody have a great day, and we'll see you next week. Steve Girardi is going to be talking about half Ironmans, and what else? I don't know. You're talking about a lot of different things. He'll figure it out. Okay, thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.